Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours, where we answer your questions 7 days a week. Bill, what do we have?
Our first question this morning comes from Pedro G. Gonzalez III in Washington, D.C., and Pedro wonders, the new Shure MV7i just hit the market. Why should I buy it?
If only we had someone that could answer that question. I mean, we're pretty smart, but if we could just get somebody from Shure to come in and answer that question. Laura Davidson is here in the panel from Shure. Laura, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Alex. It's so good to be back.
So good to have you. So this is the new another MV7.
Yes, another MV7, but a very different MV7.
Right. So there's an MV7X, right? Yes. There's an MV7 Plus, the MV7,
yep.
And now there's the MV7i. You're going to have to maybe have a whole new company called MV7 pretty soon.
Yeah, we might.
So what's new with the i?
So it is the first dynamic mic with a built-in XLR/quarter-inch input. So let me say that again. It is a microphone with an XLR and quarter-inch input. So it's a
microphone with an interface. So for those listening, I'm talking into an SM7B. That's going into a Mix Pre 3, which then goes in. So that's the interface. That's how we're getting the mic, because the mic's an XLR out. And the problem you get into is, you might be able to put two mics into it if you have a computer, but if you have a laptop or like an Air, or if you have a phone or an iPad, you only have one input to work with, and it's difficult to make that work.
It is. So we decided to streamline it, because the reason why we made the MV7 way back in 2020 was so that we could have high quality, Shure quality sound in a USB form factor, and also have it be a hybrid by having an XLR output so that you could put it into an interface. Mm-hmm. But we're always trying to find something to make people's lives easier and better. So the MV7i allows you to have a microphone and another microphone plugged in. Oh, yeah. This guy over here, the SM7DB, is being powered by the MV7i.
And so it's not only doing the interface, but it's also doing 48 volt.
It is, correct.
Yeah. Although the Sennheiser doesn't need that, I guess.
Yes.
Now, does the input act as an output if needed, or is it always an input?
It's always an input.
Okay.
But you can sum them, so you can do it in a few different ways. So right now I have it in output mode where it's two separate channels out. So if I put this into my DAW, my digital audio workstation, I use Logic Pro, it recognizes two channels instantly, but you can sum them into stereo as well. So it gives you some versatility and flexibility on the output side. But it's functioning as an input, essentially.
And how do you control it?
You control it using our Motive Mix app. So let me pull that up so everybody can play along at home. So Motive Mix is an app that allows you to bring multiple USB sources or audio sources into your computer, mix them within your computer, and then decide how you want to route them. So right now, you can see my available sources on the left-hand side. I selected my MV7i, and that is right here. So you're hearing my MV7i right now. That's my active channel. If I switch over here, now you're hearing my SM7DB, which it's powering, as I mentioned before. And you can see when I activate the settings over here that it's actually going to be applying some DSP, if I want it, digital signal processing, to that additional input. So this is my analog mic plugged in. I'm giving it phantom power so it can engage the preamp that's built into my SM7DB. And I have it on auto level mode. So auto level mode is something we introduced with MV7, which allows you to just not think about your gain and talk and be free. And now you can apply it to any mic. It doesn't have to be a USB mic. So I'm controlling the settings of the mic. I can also determine my global settings of my MV7i, which I have in auto level mode here, with my real-time denoiser and my popper stopper. So that's something that we've added to Motive Mix.
And you could have inside of Motive, you could have other inputs. So you could have the computer, you could have other things connected to it, but this is just two of the mics. And now how does this work? Do you have software in the iPad and iPhone as well, or is it going into just existing?
This is desktop. So you would use this on your desktop. If you want to use Motive Audio, you can still do Motive Audio and Motive Video, which are our mobile versions of the apps, and that can control our USB audio microphones.
And if you set this, so let's say you test these mics the way you want them, and you set them in Motive, the MV7i will remember the setting for the XLR and itself, right?
Correct. It will store the settings.
All right. And we got some questions here from the panel here, Jeff.
Laura, thanks for being here. I actually have two questions. The first is about the LEDs on the mic. Are those just display, or are they also some form of control? I saw something on the webpage about tapping that.
Yes. So it's a tap to mute. So let's not do that. So it's tap to mute anywhere on there. And then you can customize the LED colors just like you can with the MV7 Plus. And you can do that within the Motive Mix app. So you can make your own brand colors, or you can have it worked as an audio meter and it will show you if you're clipping.
Are you able to disable the tap to mute?
Yes, you can lock it out.
Ask me why I know. Why I need that.
I wonder why you're asking that.
We send these out. We send these MV7s out. And the number one problem that happens is someone grabs onto the mic and then they're gone.
Yes. Then bye-bye. Yes, you can absolutely lock it out.
Yeah, that's good. Courtney?
Yeah, I know the Motive app runs on all platforms there, but is there a way to control or balance the level between the two mics without using the app? Is there any local control over level?
Nope, you have to do it within the app itself.
And the other question is there, with the DSP functions, they're built into the mic, I assume, and not into the app. Does that cause any latency in going out if you're using the noise cancellation?
No. No latency. And I should say, when you can control the settings of the microphones, the audio levels, if you're using it in a DAW without using Motive Mix. So I should say that, but there's just no tactile control on the MV7i.
And the reason that there's no latency is because all the processing is happening in the mic, right?
Right.
Yep. Right. The app is sending commands to the mic, but they're not. But it's not doing any processing itself.
Right.
Interesting. Yep. Go ahead, Bill.
So many people are now getting into things like podcasting. This seems like the ideal setup for doing a two-person interview or something like that. Was it designed for those kind of things in mind, or what are the other things that people are using, or you expect people to use with this setup?
Yeah, it's a great question. So it's perfect for a two-person podcast that you want to be mobile and on the go and portable. But it's also great for singer-songwriters. You know, I've got some instruments back behind me, so I could plug 1/4 inch into the back for my guitar and then record my vocals at the same time. So
does it do high Z?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. High Z and yeah.
That's interesting. Marty?
Hi, this is really interesting. So a couple of things. If you had two of the MV7Is, you could essentially have 4 microphones going into your computer, right? Now, can you take those two MV7Is and route them through a USB hub so that you'd only have one USB connection at your laptop?
That depends on the hub. But because of Motive Mix, you wouldn't even need the hub. If you have 2 USB ports on your computer, you could plug directly in and then have all 4 sources be recognized via Motive Mix. Hope that answers that.
I feel like I want to do a test, get like a good OWC hub and plug it into my phone and then have 2 7Is and 2 7 pluses and plug them all in together. Go ahead.
Well, I'm plugged into a USB hub right now.
And it's working.
And it's working. So, but I only have one MV7i to test that with. But yeah,
it should be enough.
Motive Mix allows you to do that.
As long as you don't copy anything to the drive, a drive connected to it at the same time.
Right.
Go ahead, Jeff.
So an obvious use case, as Bill said, is the two-person podcast, like you have set up with 2 mics, that if you had a second mic for the other person, but only one headphone output. So I assume that has enough power to drive to a splitter to split the 2 headphones?
Yes. Yep, exactly.
Interesting.
So maybe the 7i2 will have 2 headphone outputs?
Oh, that's a good suggestion, Jeff. I'll get that back to the mothership.
or 3 headphone outputs, because it'll have 3 XLRs on the back. It'll just be like this thing that is like a little mixer. Good, Courtney.
Okay, Alex.
And does the new i have the same motor, the same capsule, dynamic capsule as the MV7?
Yes, it is identical to the MV7 Plus and MV7. Yes.
Another question that came in from the viewers.
Is there an API, Juan Robles asked, out of Mexico City, Mexico, or a software development kit to control the mic controls?
Not yet, but we're always working on new things, so that's a great suggestion, but no API as of now.
It's really useful for us because one of the things that we like to try to do is get to a point where we like why that would be useful for us is if because I send these mics out, so I'm sending either MV7s or MV6s, out to folks, and being able to have them jump into Zoom and then be able to open up a control interface inside of Zoom and control their mic would be gold, because we're sending it to people who don't know anything about a mic. They barely know which way to talk into it. And we need to be able to just have them just point it in the right direction, and then I'll take over the mic and set it the way I need it to be set. And that could be either an API, or you guys could, we'll put you in touch with Zoom. You can build your own Zoom app.
Okay.
Zoom app to make it in the marketplace, so that just a Shure controller. But that would be a huge boom for us, because we want to. The biggest problem we have is that we hand someone we send mics out every week, and again, MV7s typically we're moving to MV6s because they're less expensive and
I
they're
love
simple.
that.
And,
I just heard that. I'm so excited.
yeah, the biggest problem we have is they get there and the person doesn't know what to do with it, and all we want to do is be able to say, just plug it in to your computer. And as soon as Zoom sees it, we can take over.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Marty.
Yeah, that's a great idea. But when you do set up a mic using the Motive, and you set it up the way you want, and then if you disconnect the mic and plug it into a different computer, will the settings be remembered in the microphone?
Yes. So it stores your settings to the microphone itself.
We keep on going back to that because we're like, really? It'll save the settings?
Yes. Yeah, and all of our mics prior to that, the MV88 Plus, the MV7, the MV7 Plus, all remember the settings that you configure it in.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Another kind of a Zoom-related question. When you plug, since there are two independent mics coming in over the single USB, does Zoom see it? Can you differentiate the two microphones? Does it come in as two different USB mics in Zoom, or does
not in Zoom, but in other digital audio workstations? Yes, it comes in as two.
A separate USB. So if you're using currently with the Motive app and Zoom, you would choose which microphone is up in the Motive app, and that would be what would present itself to Zoom?
Correct.
That would work. Okay.
Yes.
Or it would sum them together, right? Like it would just deliver it to Zoom as one. It would sum the two
So
mics
right now
together.
I have the MV7i selected as my audio input source in Zoom as my microphone. And I'm controlling which source is selected.
But if both mics
mix.
were live, it would just send both mics it would sum them together and send them to Zoom. Yeah.
And can it send in stereo then?
Yes, it can.
Left and right channel. Yeah. Zoom. Yeah. Okay, great.
Yep.
What's interesting there is also that, again, if we had two people, it just means that you do have two people coming into Zoom and you still have control over each mic. It's useful. Go ahead, Jeff.
While we're talking about remote control, I would wonder whether there's a companion connection for the Motive app so that you could control via companion and then Stream Decks to do level controls and muting and those sorts of things.
Yes. I love that idea. And I'm thinking of ways I could get it to the mothership as fast as possible. But
that's great. Yeah. Awesome. Laura, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always a blast. I appreciate you.
Let us know when you have new mics coming out. We're always excited with what you guys are working on. This one looks fantastic.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right. Thanks again. And Bill, let's go ahead and jump into the next questions.
Next one comes from Jeff Francis, Columbia, South Carolina, here on the panel. The IT department at the venue where I live streamed instructed me to turn off spanning tree on the switch I connected to their network. What is spanning tree, and what are the caveats for disabling this?
Go ahead, Mickey.
So spanning tree protocol protects the network from broadcast storms from that occur because of loops within the network. So say if you have 3 switches and somehow you have switch 1 connected to switch 2, 2 to 3, and then 3 to back to 1. Spanning tree protocol will protect the network from saturation from the broadcast noise by individually shutting down ports on the switches that cause the loop. Within the spanning tree protocol, you can set a hierarchy or priority of which ports would be turned off first that allows you to make sure that connectivity between things are maintained because of that, because of the priority. I'm not sure why they would ask you to turn that off. It's that's a big question in my mind, why they would want to remove that protection in your network. I'm sure other more knowledgeable network folks would know of possible reasons why. But for me, like I'd like to maintain that protection as long as, of course, you can manage that priority.
Go ahead, Marty.
Yeah, that's pretty much on the nose. In a larger multi-switch network, there would be several reasons why you might want to have switches interconnected, perhaps for redundancy, perhaps for a number of different reasons. And what Spanning Tree does is it prevents feedback loops to occur, essentially data feedback, where you have one switch talking to another switch, which is talking back to the first switch. And, as Mickey said, it just saturates your network. Now you're connecting one more switch to their network using a single port. So Spanning Tree would not be an issue. Feedback loops would not be an issue. Why they would have you turn that off would probably be just for standard practice. Right?
Go ahead, Jeff.
Thank you, Mickey. Thank you, Marty. That's kind of what I figured out in doing quick research about this. What has happened in the past is when I connected that switch, their network has a Spanning Tree guard policy that basically, I think if it detects a switch on any port, it shuts down that port. So I think the way to overcome that is, I think it's detecting it by seeing Spanning Tree on that new switch that gets added. So I think this is probably not the best way for them to do that, but I think it's the easy way that I have to make a change rather than they make a change to the port I'm connecting to. But
so they're identifying it by span. They're identifying the switch from seeing.
As I understand it, they are identifying my switch being connected to the network.
And a lot of times people, IT, like tightly controlled IT, they want to know one device per port. That they control everything and it's one device per port. You're not putting a switch in and suddenly adding 8 more devices, so that they have more control over that. So that I can see how that might be the case. Go ahead, Marty. Can't hear you.
I'm not sure that they would be actually detecting your switch using Spanning Tree. That's not really its function. But there are other protocols that some switches have. Netgear AV switches, for example, have other protocols that can be used to prevent feedback loops other than Spanning Tree. When Spanning Tree kicks in, it can cause an interruption in the data flow for a brief period of time, and other protocols would avoid that.
JJ also said Spanning Tree protocol can also define which layer 2 device is in charge of maintaining the VLAN database for the infrastructure. MAC address information is imperative as packets are sent from A to Z in the topology based on this method rather than TCP/IP. All right, next question.
Next one comes to us from Ryan Nichols in Reno, Nevada. Does anyone on the panel have experience with YouTube's URL Captions or 608-708 captions for live events? We've been experimenting with streaming URL Captions, but have had limited success.
Yeah, I've done a fair bit of this. So there's 2 different ways to get in, and usually we don't call it a URL captions, but we call it HTTP captions but it is a URL. It's an HTTP URL. So basically, there are 2 ways to get into YouTube. I have to admit, I haven't used the HTTP version for a long time. It's usually where you get started, but if you do a lot of this, you end up with 608, 708 solutions. So basically, the 608-708 is you're embedding those captions into your signal before it reaches your encoder. When it gets to your encoder, it's streamed to YouTube, and YouTube keeps those together. And the advantage of that is that you have a lot of hardware, you have it all tied together, it stays synced. and it's all in one. It's a traditional TV pipeline to get there. That's why they started to support it, was because a lot of TV networks wanted to be able to have captions, and they already had the captions because it's the law in the United States, but they couldn't get them into YouTube easily because it didn't support 608, 708. I don't know, 10 years ago. So before that, they had these HTTP captions, which I believe are still available. And what happens is there's an YouTube gives you an HTTP link, and you deliver that. And there's a couple different ways to do that. Stream text is the most common one that people will use. So stream text will take a URL caption. Also, if you have an Eclipse if you have an Eclipse system that is used for those for captioning, it can have a port that you can give it a URL. So that URL goes in, and then you should see if that device, and I don't know what you're using to get those HTTP captions in, but those are the two that we've seen the most. And those have been pretty successful. One of the advantages, by the way, of if you have buffering in your encoder, one of the advantages of having a caption, having the caption and URL, is that you can increase the buffer in your encoder and line the more tightly line the captions up, because a lot of times captions, the human delay of someone captioning for you is oftentimes 3 to 4 seconds. So if you buffer, you can slow down the video just a little bit, and the captions will catch up. If you do it too much, people won't believe it's live anymore because the captions are coming up before the quote unquote live video. So you have to be careful of that, but you can tighten the connection between those two a little bit as you kind of work on it. You can't do that with 608, 708. So 608, 708 is definitely a more stable environment to do this with, but it's more expensive. Typically, we're using something like a EEG 491 or 492 to do the embedding, and we typically have either that's using iCap and either going out to an AI solution that's going to do the work. EEG has some solutions for that, or a person who can be just listening to the audio anywhere in the world, typing it in, and that's coming in over IP into the EEG. It inserts it into what we call the VANC data inside of the SDI signal, and then delivering it as 608, 708. But for URL, it's a little bit more straightforward. But the only two systems we've ever had particularly successful for URL captions are the Stream Text and the Eclipse system. Again, the other way to add those in is AI Media has, they ended up merging with EEG. They have ways that you can stream it to them. They will insert them and then deliver them to YouTube basically as 608, in the same way that 608, 708 would do it. So those are a couple of different options. Hopefully that helps. If you have any other questions, let us know. Next question.
Mariela Sushamera of Webelow is back again with, for signal flow diagram connection lines, what colors does everyone use for each type of cable, such as blue for audio, green for video, black for ground, that sort of thing?
No standard. So there's no standard. Like there are people who have told me that there's standards, but everybody's got their own way of doing it. What I will tell you is that typically we don't use colors Typically, I don't use colors. I use dotted lines. And the reason for that is if they get Xerox copied or if they're sent out and someone sees them without color, I need to be able to identify the lines based on the dashes as opposed to the colors. So you don't assume that you have a color printer or a color representation of that output. You want to make sure that you're using dashes to make those delineations. But I've seen people more common or less common, but I've never seen a standard that really says this is the way this should be. Go ahead, Marty.
Yeah, I don't believe there is. If there was one, it would probably come from a VIXA, and I think they do have standards for like label colors, and certainly for the wires themselves and signals that they carry. But for diagrams, I haven't seen one.
We have people who have proposed standards for this kind of thing. We just don't have anything that has actually become a standard for these things. Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, I think the great old line about the great thing about standards is there are so many of them. In the early days of baseband video, you could pretty sure that the Sony old protocol of red and white being left and right, and then yellow being video and stuff like that. But it's gotten so complicated after that I agree. I know Alex talks a lot about resistor codes and things like that, where there are some standards from other industries, but they don't always percolate across, and you have to test everything because you can never tell for sure what anything is.
Next question.
Next question comes from David Brady in New York City. My local watering hole's AV setup is a mess. Is there a cost-effective AV over IP matrix anyone has experience with? Currently 8 TVs and 2 tuners at each cable and satellite.
Good, Courtney.
The way I've done this in the past, and I've had to do this in a number of bar setups for TV shows, is to use a RF modulator, a QAM ATSC modulator. There's a number of them out there that you can get that are rack mountable, like this one. You put this in a rack in the back, and it just takes multiple HDMI inputs, so you can put your satellite receivers all in a rack and back behind the scenes where nobody has access to them, and then modulate the output of each of those HDMI inputs into HD signals that you can just send over regular coax to the antenna connections of all those standard TVs out there. So you can have multiple channels. This one does up to 4 different channels over a single cable. So if they're hooked up, if there are, of all those TVs already hooked into a common cable system or a satellite feed of some sort, then you can just use those existing coax cables. There's another more expensive one here from PVI, Pro Video Instruments, that is a rack mount that has 4K instead of HD. It does RF modulation on a single cable as well as IP, so it has Ethernet connections as well to send it over a common Ethernet connection. So either one of those, it's not a cheap way to go, but if you have existing cabling, it can make it a lot cheaper than trying to put multiple satellite receivers or multiple cable tuners at each location, or even streaming video sticks somewhere and then your own streams, multiple streams, and having to encode multiple streams.
Just, who came up with the name Infinium? it's like
everyone has to coin a name.
Okay, go ahead, Marty.
Yeah, there are a number of ways to do this, and there are, like, I don't know, maybe 100 different companies that make HDMI matrices. I'll just rattle off a few. I only came up with a few, like AV Matrix USA, AV Pro Edge, Canex Pro, and Kramer, and that's just down to the case. If you're going to use HDMI and a matrix, you might want to look for a matrix that also includes the extenders built in. So the matrix would have the senders built in, and it would go to Cat5. And at the other end, you'd have the receiver converters that go back to HDMI. And that way, it's a more compact, more integrated solution. Another way to go is using NDI for distribution. Right? You could do that.
Good, Courtney.
I forgot to mention one advantage of going RF over ATSC encoders is it's just one cable, and you can use I think up to 1,000 feet on a cable, so you don't have to worry about sending HDMI over long distances. So just an RF cable, and you can use a standard RF splitter that handles UHF to split out to multiple TVs, and each TV then can be tuned locally between the four different channels. So it's like your local television station. So you can tune at each TV, can individually be selected between the different channels without having to go back to the router and route them to that TV in particular.
Go ahead, Bill.
I know you're going to do a great job if you get this gig and you're going to go in and rewire your watering hole's AV setup. I'm just going to please, if you do that, do some sort of documentation for the next folk. I can't tell you the number of times I've been asked to come in and videotape a band or something like that. And you run into something that's been done by 15 different people at 15 different times, and you cannot figure out what they did. You're literally spend the first 2 days just trying to untangle their individual ideas of how things should be wired and cabled and put together. So if you can do a little flip book or something and leave it on a chain next to the equipment that says, here's how I did it, it will make you a friend of everybody who comes after you. Just saying.
I had done a bunch of installs for locations in my early 20s or mid 20s, and there was a bar that I went to that their thing was a mess, and I said, and they were trying to add. They said, "Can you help us put these speakers up?" And I said, "Sure." And I said, "Just let me come in Saturday morning, and I'll get those speakers up for you." And they said, "How early?" And I said, "About 6 o'clock in the morning." And they were like, 6 o'clock in the morning. We don't even open until 4 in the afternoon. Why do you need so much time to put a couple speakers in? I said, well, it's going to take a little time to wire. And when they let me in, I came in and rewired the entire bar. So like I just ripped everything out, put it all back in, labeled it all, put it all there, and so and I don't know what your watering hole will do, but I never had to pay for beer again. Like so anytime if I just came in, they were like, it's on us, and that was it. So doing good deeds sometimes will turn out well. Next question.
Brian Taylor, Washington, D.C. is up next. The time codes in the posted versions of Office Hours seem to be very inaccurate. See the January 7th, 2025 show. Do the time codes change once the video is posted, or is the logger using live time codes for reference?
Go ahead, Mickey.
So the timestamps are taken from a system that is triggered live during the show. If you're talking about the timestamps that you see within Mokana itself, those timestamps would only be accurate up until the point that the YouTube video is processed, meaning the countdown at the start of the show is removed. If you're talking about the timestamps that's posted within YouTube, same deal. Their own. It's actually the opposite. The timestamps within YouTube would be accurate after the countdown is removed. That automated system that triggers those timestamps aren't always the most accurate, because sometimes the next question is called, but then the topic continues over without going to the next question immediately. So those situations have to be manually corrected, assuming someone has the time to correct it.
And if you'd like to work on the team that does that, if it bothers you, then you should work on it. So let us know. You can reach out. You can go to officehours.global/volunteer. And if you have any questions, by the way, if you have questions during the show or even after the show, between shows, you can go to askofficehours.global. That is askofficehours.global. You can use that little QR code there as well. And you can ask those questions. You don't need to be logged into anything. You can just put your name and your question in and send it in, and try to keep it well formed and focused, and we'll get it on the show. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Peter Moore in Auckland, New Zealand. I was updating the software for my Blackmagic Design ATEM Mini, and I noticed in the settings that you can enable MIDI to control it. Has anyone used this feature, and why would I want to? Thanks.
I go, Jeff.
I have not, but now I'm thinking about it that you asked this, because MIDI controllers are all around us. I just reached out from my desk, and I've got this old Behringer fader thing. So
2000.
Maybe
is that the 2000, the BSC 2000 or BC 2000?
BCF 2000.
Yeah.
Yes. And so that could maybe control all my audio settings without having to go into the software. I have this funny little Kickstarter alternative keyboard, but what's that?
What is that?
That is a thing called an Easy Play.
Uh-huh.
I did a Kickstarter for it this summer. It's a little musical instrument. That's middle C and octaves of C's. But when you spin, it's got like 24 different sounds in it. It's got a drum machine. Awesome. But you can also turn it and make it output MIDI via USB-C or Bluetooth.
Oh, that's cool.
Bidirectional Bluetooth, actually. So I can play the Hammond app in my phone through the speaker of this. But maybe awesome. I can connect that to my ATEM and have it as mute buttons for my audio. Right.
Yeah, go ahead, Courtney.
You can also use this for show control. In the earlier days, before everything was automated with all the things that we can use as Adorans for, etc. You could use MIDI control codes to control the switcher crossfade between inputs at a certain point in the music playback or a show playback. Or a time code based drive a show like a music stage show with certain cues that operate different things off of MIDI control. So that way you could have it control your videos that are feeding your iMag screens, et cetera, at different points in the music, et cetera.
Yeah, I think that primarily it's designed to work with the audio panel inside of the ATEM. I think that's how it's. If you plug a Korg or other MIDI devices in, I think they'll immediately map to to the audio controls within the ATEM, just within the audio panel. I don't think it's designed to do anything other than audio, but we'll
you
see.
can't control the switcher with.
Not that I know of. I think that when I tested it a long time when it first came out, and I think it was. I know that I can't remember which one I have.
Did you only plug audio control panels into it, or?
I put a Korg, like the little Korg, and immediately had control over my volumes. Yeah. So that's what I think it's designed for. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Kern in Maine, looking for a recommendation for a mic fishpole setup for a high school media production class. The preference is on build quality for student use. We have a Sennheiser MKE 600, but need the hardware to go with it. Budget is about $1,000 US. Thanks.
Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, you don't mention Kern, like exactly what type of productions your students would be doing. I would typically go for having a good set or selection of poles to fit the type of shoot that we're doing, or even like within, say, if you're shooting a narrative, the type of shot that you're doing. For a narrative, I often default to a pole that's 18 to 24 feet. But if I'm doing run and gun work or having to shoot in a tight location, I might switch over for specific shots to using a pole that's 9 to 12 feet. So you'd typically want a selection for that. My recommendation would be to go with a carbon fiber or a graphite boom pole. That those are extremely lightweight and are what, if you're teaching kids or if you're teaching students of how to do things professionally, that's typically what you would find in a professional set production set. I would highly recommend products from KTech and also Ambient. This is the KP18 from KTech. This is a 5-section boom pole. The number of sections directly relates to how short you can collapse the pole. The more sections, the shorter it could be when collapsed. So this is a 5-section pole from KTech, 18 feet. This is a nice stage pole, as people would call it. This retails for around $830, $840 US. Another similar option would be the quick poles of Series 5 from Ambient. Series 5 again means 5 sections. And this one is, when fully extended, is about 17.5 feet. And is about 800 US as well, 800, 900 US. On the shorter side of things, this is a 9-foot pole, KP9 from KTech. Both of these poles are from their classic line, which is this family of boom poles from KTech has been around for decades, and it's been around for so long just because it works so darn well. So this is a shorter pole from them. This is about 600 US, and a similar pole from Ambient, 5 sections still. This goes up to just over 10 feet, and that one's about 600, 700 US. I would see if you can stretch your budget so that you can get, at least 2 poles. But if you really can't, maybe find a good middle ground somewhere in between, maybe a 16-foot pole, so that you have the reach when you need it, and it's not long as stage poles when it's fully collapsed, so that you can still shoot in tight situations, and it's not too cumbersome if you have to do run and gun shoots. Pair that with, I'm a big fan of the Radius, the microphone accessories from Radius. This is their pistol grip shock mount, the Rad 3. This is a Rad 2, which is just a shock mount without the pistol grip. If you only could get one, I'd go with one with a pistol grip. Pair that with their Nimbus windshield, or my personal what I've been going with over the past year are the products from Bumblebee Industries. You might want a foam for indoor use, and a wind killer, like a furry softy, what other brands call a softy, for mixed use indoor and outdoor. But if you find yourself working in outdoor locations that are really windy, or if you're doing studio shoots where you have like a wind machine blowing, you might want a full windshield with a windjammer on it. Popular one forever has been the modular windshield from Rycote. For that specific mic, you would want to go with the modular windshield 4, which is the correct size for that. And another one that I really like is the Super Shield from Rycote, which is not as doesn't have as much features as the modular windshield kit, but allows you to very, very quickly transition between indoor and outdoor setups because you can pull out the front pod. And I personally like, if I'm doing run and gun shoots, I keep the foam on inside the mounted on the mic, and then put the Super Shield front pod in front of it, so that if I'm outdoors, I have a full windshield kit with a windjammer on it. But if we go indoors, I can just take out that front pod, and I just have a nice foam inside.
Go ahead, Marty.
So a couple of things that you want to look for in these types of microphone supports, particularly when you're dealing with students who are learning, who are younger, and equipment that's going to be put into storage, taken out of storage, in a stock room. You want something that's going to be a bit more durable. So some of the things you'll be looking for in a boom pole is the collapsed length for storage, the extended length for reach, depending on the kind of production you're doing, whether the pole has an internal cable with a connector at the top and a connector at the bottom. Without that, you have to run a wire outside the boom pole up to your microphone, and that could be cumbersome. So an internal cable is much more convenient, especially when you're extending it and collapsing it and moving from location to location. When you collapse it, you have to collect all of that wire. If it's outside with an internal wire, you don't need to do that. Other criteria are the material that the boom pole is made of, whether it's graphite or carbon fiber or aluminum. Aluminum is going to be more durable. It's going to be a little bit heavier, right? But it can stand up to a lot more abuse. It can stand up to being dropped, or if you drop this and it hits the edge of a desk, for instance, with a sharp edge, graphite and carbon fiber can crack. So aluminum can be more durable. You'll have to deal with a bit more weight, but that could be a good trade-off. Then you'll want the shock mount and the windscreens. And again, when you're dealing with those, think about how much abuse it can take, whether it's made of plastic or aluminum or rubber suspensions and things. K-Tech's Avalon series of boom poles is their entry level, and they have both graphite and aluminum at a variety of lengths, and there's a couple of different lines within the Avalon series, so I highly recommend that. They're going to be more cost-effective than the professional series. They can also provide you with shock mounts and a number of different kinds of windscreens that could be effective depending on what you need to do, whether you're shooting indoors or whether you're shooting outdoors, whether you need to block wind or just room air. So take a look at K-Tech.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, boy, I can't add very much to everything that was said so far. Covered very completely by Mickey and Marty there. The only thing I can say is about the internal wiring. Internal wirings usually use a coiled cable these days. If you have a connector at the top and a connector at the bottom, that puts a little strain every time you lower it and raise it. Plus, it can rattle inside that coiled cable unless they use a cotton-covered coiled cable that's inside there, which will rattle a lot less. Another thing, you got to keep those carbon fibers clean. You need a little boom shine here, which is came up with the late Manfred Clemmy, the person who started K-Tech. Created this product to clean their boom poles, because if you don't keep those carbon fibers clean, a little sand or grit can get into the clutches in there, and it can cause those sections to stick. So you got to make sure you clean them all the time and get that dust and dirt out of them before it gets sucked into the inside of those boom poles.
And think about one boom pole that you get that will fold up to less than 20 inches because that way you can fit it into a carry-on. Checking boom poles, they consider those as fighting staffs, I'm told. So as a result, you have to check them instead of carrying them on. So if you want to carry it on, you need it to be able to fold up to less than 20 inches to fit into your carry-on. So it's something to think about. You can make it a little bit shorter if you want to put it into one of your bags. But if you bring a long pole, they're not going to let a lot of U.S. Carriers will not let you carry it on. Fun little fact: if you watch Patriot games in the CIA, he sees a redhead walking around in the building during Patriot games. That's Brenda Clemming from K-Tech. If you're wondering, that's her. She happens to be in that movie. Next question.
Craig McFarland in Boston, Massachusetts. Up next, OWC announced their 40 gigabit per second, I think. Active optical USB-C cable, 10-foot and 15-foot lengths available. Will this be a trend? And he's got a link there to the product.
Yeah, this is pretty important because a lot of times we have a hard time going longer USB and Thunderbolt cables. And so this is OWC's cables here. And we should probably see more and more of these optical cables because when it comes to the kind of speeds we're looking for now, it's going to be very hard to get those speeds out of copper. So you can get a 3-foot one, maybe a 6-foot one. But when you start getting to 10 or 15 feet, we're having a hard time having any of these be able to carry the data and sometimes the power across that distance. So I think you're going to see more and more of these active optical cables being used. Next question.
Mariella Shushameiros, back from Webelow. On our class Yamaha USB mixer, the line inputs say negative 10 dB unbalanced. What precisely does this mean? Would balanced quarter-inch cables eliminate the negative 10 dB?
Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, this is a really great question. And so there's a couple different areas where these different numbers lie. So one thing to just take in mind is that you have two ways that analog connections are going to get into a system, right? And that's mic or line level, right? A physical XLR connection or a line input typically, which is like a quarter-inch connection, okay? These different cables are made differently. When you see something is balanced or unbalanced, what that means is that inside the cable there's a third conductor, okay? There's a hot and a cold, and there's a third conductor that is made out of copper that is actually running the entire length of that cable. This is why mic cables are actually really expensive, is because they are wrapped in copper internally and under the jacket. What this does essentially is it inverts external artifacts and noise, which could be like EMI, electromagnetic interference, and mainly ground hums, like 60 cycle ground hums, and cancels it out of the cable, right? And especially in situations where you have large masses of XLR hanging, in piles when everything's all plugged in, it's real easy for these things to jump from cable to cable, and balancing them really eliminates this thing. So that's what the balance means, okay? The minus 10, there's kind of two levels of equipment, okay? There's consumer grade stuff, which runs at minus 10, and then there's pro grade stuff, which runs at plus 4. If you get real, like top of the line stuff, sometimes it will allow a choice actually for the inputs, so you can really take whatever your program material, whatever's feeding that interface, you can set it up correctly. But your mixer essentially it's an inexpensive mixer, and so if that stuff was balanced, it would be insanely more expensive. So that's kind of what this stuff means.
Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, and just to add to what Chris mentioned, if you have a minus 10 unbalanced input, just replacing the cables would not change the fact that that input, the circuitry on that specific input on the board, is unbalanced consumer line level. So there's no way around it aside from if your board has professional line level inputs that are plus 10 dBu, plus 4 dBu and are balanced, then utilize those. But just using different cables will not change the fact that it's a consumer input.
Go ahead, Jeff.
Like we said before, talking about things being standards, that aren't we lucky that we have lots of standards? The minus 10 that we're talking about is actually a dBV standard, and the plus 4 we're talking about is a dBu standard. So everyone in the world would do normal math and say from plus 4 to minus 10 is 14 decibels. but actually it's not, because they're slightly different scales. It's actually 11.8 decibels. The two scales are slightly off, 2.2 dB off from each other, and they track with that. So you're actually closer to 12 dB different. If you take a look, this is the very bottom Yamaha mixer, and there's that line input. And you see, following along from this input number 3, you see this little triangle that says the amplifier there, and it only has one input to it. That's an unbalanced. And if we go up to the actual mic line inputs that have an XLR on it, you see there are 2 lines going into that head amp. That's a balanced input. So we have the plus and the minus up on the normal microphone balanced inputs, and then down. So this is a great way to, if you're not sure about what exactly the device does, go into the block diagram. This is not schematics. This is not electricity. This is a block diagram, but you can very quickly tell when you look at this TRS input, there's the tip, ring, and the sleeve, and both the sleeve and the ring, the ring and the sleeve are both connected to ground. Only the tip carrying the signal goes into the mixer. So that means that is truly an unbalanced input, and even if you use a balanced cable, you will not get a balanced signal because it's an unbalanced input.
If what you're doing here is, if what we're doing here is valuable to you, there's a couple ways you can help. You can, of course, like and subscribe, share what we're doing here with other folks. You can also donate. You can go to officehours.global/donate and help us pay the bills, make sure that this stays running. Or you can volunteer at officehours.global/volunteer and become part of the village that makes this happen every single day. Next question.
Danny Grizzle in Longview, Texas up next. I'm a Final Cut Pro user who struggles with audio. Hindenburg is a digital audio workstation that is specialized for speech. It has XML in and out for multiple NLEs, Tentacle Sync, ISO tracks, and files. Exciting. Can the panelists comment on the pros and cons? And he's got a link there to Hindenburg.
Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, I was looking at it earlier. It seems like an interesting solution, though it's certainly geared more towards just audio only content, not sync content that goes with video. And they even mentioned this in their marketing material. And this is the website of Hindenburg Pro. If you take a look at the UI, it seems to be heavily geared towards editing through transcription, and also with using, say, if you have a script, you can use that to edit as well, which you typically do that if you're doing work with video, typically do that during the picture edit, not during sound editorial. So it's really geared towards like radio work, maybe audio podcasts. Looking though at the feature set here, they tout features that I wouldn't consider useful in like professional work. Maybe perhaps like if you're doing a podcast as a hobby, it might be useful for you. But say being able to automatically adjust levels, that's something I personally, on the type of work that I do, would not find useful, because the types of work that we do get to the point of we are scrutinizing things down to specific syllables, like pushing a specific syllable 2 dB louder to emphasize something, for example. But perhaps like in other types of work where it's like quick and dirty, podcasts that are like some people might call disposable content. Maybe it's a solution that might fit well there.
Good, Bill.
And I just also wanted to mention, a lot of people I hear on the news groups and things like that have trouble with audio inside Final Cut. I'm always reminded of my friend Ryan Velan, who is part of the national broadcast system in a European area, and they do hundreds of hours of reality and scripted programming every year, and they do everything on Final Cut. And when I was talking to him once at NAB, we were discussing the fact that you really do need to kind of stop thinking one way and kind of change your thinking idea when you get into how Final Cut handles these things. So I would just highly suggest that you spend some time on the news groups and communities where people use Final Cut a lot, because some people like Ryan and others and his team have solved all the problems. And I say that all the problems because they're putting out an amazing amount of content, including huge multi-camera shows and things like that, staying entirely inside Final Cut, and it works for them. Now, that doesn't mean it's easy to to figure out how to do that. But it does, if you just try to take your entire traditional audio thinking and move it into Final Cut and expect it all to work like that, I think you will have problems. That's what we all talk about in the community. You kind of have to learn how it works rather than demanding that it works like you work. Just a thought.
And I think it's $45. I mean, for the top of the line, it's $45 a month. So it's commitment. So hopefully you're planning to do a lot of it. If you're going to, it looks like a subscription service. It does look very focused. So if all you're doing is one thing, it might make sense, but it looks like it could be a little pricey over time. Next question.
Robert Soji in Los Angeles. Can Chris tell us about his PMC speakers?
Go ahead, Chris.
All right, yeah. They are the most important thing in my studio. Absolutely, I am a huge fan. I see Mickey laughing. It's like mixing on an IMAX. So for me, I have like actually kind of bigger midfield. So I have 6.2s. But one thing that's amazing about PMC and just the entire line is that there's really a uniform sound no matter what size speaker you get. And just as they get bigger, they get more detailed with more headroom. But they really, there really is a family that these things all sit within. I will say, for me, I moved to PMC really to get rid of a subwoofer in my studio and to really just get the clarity that I was looking for. And I don't think I'll ever change to another brand. I'll get bigger PMCs and more PMC when I move to a surround immersive solution, mixing setup and a bigger room. But yeah, absolutely, they're the best.
Next question.
Guy Cochran in Seattle, Washington says, what might the Los Angeles news crews be using to get audio and video from the field, and how are they hearing back? They went for 11 hours yesterday, and these are the wildfires, and we just want to send a thought out to everybody who we know in the LA basin are having tough times today.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, all the local news channels have abandoned their network programming and have been doing total coverage of these fires that are going on around Los Angeles. Most of the news vans, the bigger network stations have these studio transmitter link microwave masts that are on top of the news van that can be raised to get over obstacles. And they shoot up to Mount Wilson, which can be seen from most areas around Los Angeles and Burbank and the Valley. If they can't get that, a lot of them are moving to these smaller setups. I think they're using live view to transmit over local cell towers for individual hits that are out in an area where they can't see Mount Wilson, or they do have cell coverage. So there's some of that going on too, but most of the vans are still using these STL microwaves, and the return audio comes back down that microwave link so that they can hear the studio. Or sometimes they just if they're doing live hits, they actually have a little TV set there that's picking up the transmission of that channel over the air, and they listen live, so they know when they're on.
Go ahead, Nikki.
Yeah, on the IP transmission side of things, as mentioned by Courtney, a lot of companies now use live view backpacks to transmit, and also these systems can also get a return for the IFB for your remote talent, for your on in-field reporter. Another popular company is Dejero and also TVU. Although I don't see TVU much being used by American broadcasters, I see them more in Europe. And in terms of IFB, aside from the IFB capabilities built into these boxes and services, a lot of them use standard cell phone calls to get a lower latency return for their IFBs.
Yeah, and this is they have Robert Green who works in LA says microwave and providers like LiveView and Dejero. ABC7 in LA has at least 7 microwave mountain relay points that are existing there. To reference what Courtney was talking about, we see a lot of microwave. We also see they'll send KU trucks out. Most of these folks have some KU trucks, so if they don't see it. We see live views are more popular overseas, but during news coverage, but we do see a lot of them here as well. The problem they get into in this kind of environment is that the cell towers get oversaturated, and the live views become a little, in this environment, they can become a little less stable. But we do see the live views will get to some places that the microwaves can't go. KU trucks will get there, and in this kind of thing, they're probably lighting up everything that's available in LA. So there's probably KU trucks. They're probably looking for C-band trucks. They're looking for KA transmitters. Anything that they can find to cover this. It's important. There's a lot of there's a very large front of folks that are managing a pretty incredible tragedy right now. Yeah, go ahead, Marty.
I imagine that with satellite, that the dense smoke could be a problem.
It depends on where that is. A lot of times they're not that close, So and it depends also on the compression and how it's being used. So if they're they can set a KU truck can get through a lot if it's set to a lower bandwidth but more highly reliant. So if you're using the 8 instead of 16 or there's a lot of different ways to make that more robust. And then on top of that, a C-band will cut through everything. There's nothing that we've ever had that we couldn't get up with a C-band truck. So there are other options there. Yeah, go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, I can't put it on the air right now, but I'm watching a lot of reporting now coming in, and I'm seeing a lot of it come in from people just holding up phones using FaceTime or Zoom or some other type of normal consumer type cellular connection back to the studio, and they can put that on the air. I just saw a guy doing a report, obviously holding his phone up in front of him, reporting in from the location. So in a situation like this, a disaster like this, you'll see a lot of people resorting to anything that they can to get a signal and a video out.
Yeah, and our own. I'm trying to get to it here. I don't know what my Chrome updated, and it is not stable. So the also our own Keenan Campbell. Oftentimes when these happen, so that we can keep track of what's going on, Keenan will put together a dashboard that kind of looks at all the news, looks at the web pages that are connected to it. Keenan is an expert in disaster coverage and managing first responders, and so it's so he put up it's CAL FIRE 2025.disastergroup.us. We put that link into Makana as well, into the chat. So that's another place if you are affected or just concerned. That's a place where you can kind of see all the information, put it on a screen, and keep track of what's actually happening. It should be a pretty rough couple days coming up. So hopefully things will get better and we'll get a little bit of a break in the wind. Thank you so much for everyone. Thanks for incredible questions today. Great. If we sent your questions back, if you put it in Makana, it's going to go back to your notes. You can bring it back in the next day. If you put it into the QR code and it was well formed and kind of follows the structure, then it goes back. We'll bring it back in tomorrow on our own. But thank you so much. A lot of great questions. Some questions went back, but tons and tons of great questions that are keeping the conversation moving here. We want to thank the producers for that. Thanks to the panelists. It's such a great panel on Wednesdays. We just really, really appreciate all the panelists who come in and are part of this great conversation and really elevate the conversation here on Wednesdays, especially around audio. And thanks to the incredible team on the back end that makes this possible. There is so much work that gets done processing it. In the last minute, we reached out to Laura and that was like yesterday. I think yesterday we reached out to her. There's a whole team that had to figure that out, and then we have to get her prepped. But there's a team that's making all of this happen every single day, developing new tools, making it look better and better every single day, making sure that we have content to talk about, and managing all of that from the questions to making sure that we know what's going on. It's really, really incredible, and we want to thank everybody who contributes to this small village that is required every single morning to get this done. Now, if we had done this in person and gone person to person, the Tlaloc Traversal, we would have traveled 24,000 miles. That's 38,000 kilometers, and that is 189 million bananas for scale. All right, let's go ahead and jump into After Hours. And I have to go to another meeting.
Good day. Hey, by the way,
That's
Alex,
great.
There's a Star Wars funny I thought you'd like. I'll put it in the there.
Discord me. I gotta,
oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm jumping. All right, thanks, Mike.
Bye-bye.
Good job, guys.
Happy trails.
Cheers.